Knock it out there. Right there. Where? Oh, that's Lionheart.
Good morning, folks. We want to thank you for being here to celebrate Nate on his journey. My name is Dr. Kevin Curry. My colleagues, Dr. Foster and Dr. Ewing. We have John Seaman, who's going to be here in a little bit, and Beth Matthew and Carson Latott, faculty and staff here, are about to offer an opportunity for Mr. Moyer to get up and talk about his opportunity to student teach next spring. We have 3 questions around the room that he will answer in his quick 30 minutes. Who does he aspire to be as a teacher? What opportunities has he presented himself with to get ready for student teaching? And how's he going to maximize that internship? And we're going to enjoy hearing from him over the course of the time that we have together. I will queue up the online audiences for questions. We will ask questions at the end, and Kendra Flood over there will help us translate questions from the audience. We will also ask questions on our face-to-face audience as well. So if you have questions for Nate at the end, please be sure to ask them. With that, Nate, they're all yours. We appreciate you.
Thanks, Dr. Curry. Hey, y'all. Welcome to my final presentation as a member of the PSU Ag Ed 22 cohort. Before we begin, up here and floating around the room are some QR codes to a virtual handout. Shout out to Dylan Clark for this idea, one of my cohort mates who gave me this idea. It's excellent. Save the trees. So feel free to scan that QR code, and it'll lead you to a link with some extra resources and whatnot that you can take a look at throughout the presentation. Before we begin today, I'd like to first thank all of you for coming. As I look around this room, and I know some people in the online audience are tuning in as well, each and every one of you has played a huge role in my journey towards becoming the father, the teacher, the friend, and the man that I aspire to be someday. And so I'm really appreciative that all of you came out to support me today, and I'm really excited and kind of anxious to share a little bit of part of that teaching journey with you. And so a little bit about how I came to Ag Ed. First and foremost, I did not come from an agricultural background. I didn't grow up on a family farm, but I did grow up romping and stomping around our 80-acre farm that my grandpa owns. And so I spent my life growing up in the woods, catching minnows in the creek with my dad. I still remember the very first garter snake that my dad ever caught me and let me hold. I was probably like 4 or 5 years old. And I still remember it. And so a couple pictures up here that just led me to this journey. I got involved in FFA and agricultural education in high school with my 2 ag teachers, Mrs. Valerie Fry and Mr. Kurt Swineford. And then that really just helped me develop a love for the outdoors and for agriculture. And then that eventually led to me meeting some of my best friends as a state FFA officer the year after high school. And then I started into Penn State originally as a wildlife and fisheries science major because I absolutely love the outdoors. I wanted to be a field biologist when I graduated from college. And early on in my college career, Dr. Curry and I had a sort of sit-down session, and he asked me what I wanted to do with my life. And I was like, well, I really like animals. I'm really passionate about biology and the outdoors, but I also really love education. He's like, well, you know you can do that with Ag Ed, right? I said, okay, great, I'm switching to Ag Ed. So it was really early on in my college career that I switched over to agricultural education, and I've been here since. And here at Penn State, I have really started to develop who I aspire to be as a person. And I've met some of my best friends in our cohort, as well as outside of our cohort. Got plugged into a local church here at Cedar Heights that completely changed my life. And yeah, I'm excited to be on this journey. And so like Dr. Curry said, today we're going to be covering 3 questions. Who do I aspire to be as a teacher? What experiences have I had in and outside of college that have helped me develop as a teacher? And how am I prepared to maximize my student teaching internship? So right now we're going to dive right into that first question of who do I aspire to be as a teacher? And first and foremost, we have my teaching philosophy, which I wrote freshman year in Dr. Curry's AE 100 class and have developed over the last 4 years into what it is today. And really, it can be summed up in 3 main points. I believe that passionate teachers turn into passionate students. In other words, if I'm passionate as a teacher, that passion can flow into my students, transfer to them, and then they can become passionate about the things that we're learning in and outside of the classroom. I also believe in varied teaching methods. Shout out to Dr. Foster's AE 412 methods class, where we learned about the 5 essential characteristics of effective teachers. And one of them is variability. As teachers, it's so important that we vary our teaching methods so as not to burn our students out or bore them to death, but in order to keep them engaged throughout the entire lesson. And then lastly, I believe in cultivating student success through a growth mindset. And in every single one of my classes, in all of my curriculum that I teach, I'm going to work to foster a growth mindset within me and my students. Now, moving on to classroom management, how am I going to manage my classroom someday? Well, up here on the board, as well as virtually on those handouts and up here, we have my classroom procedures, expectations, and consequences. And starting with my procedures, I want all of my students to immediately come into the classroom prepared. They're gathering their materials, whether that be their lab notebook or materials that I have written down on the board for them to get started with their lab during the day. I want my students to turn off their phone and stow that away. I believe that in the classroom, phones don't really belong unless we can use them to engage better within our curriculum. And so I want my students to stay off their phones throughout the day unless prompted otherwise. And then they're going to begin reading their bell work and start on their bell work, keeping them engaged from the very start of the lesson to the very end. And then really, I just want my students to participate and collaborate throughout the day. It's in order for us to learn, it's important for my students to participate and collaborate. And lastly, I want my students to leave the classroom better than before. So cleaning up after themselves and then leaving when I dismiss them, not when the bell dismisses them. Moving into my expectations, really, I desire 3 things from my students. That's respect, responsibility, and readiness. And really, these can cover so much. So respect, I want my students to respect themselves, each other, me as a teacher, and the classroom. And really, so much can just fall under that category. If my students are respectful, they're gonna take care of a lot in the classroom. I also expect my students to be responsible, especially those juniors and seniors in my classes. They're going through this weird transitional phase where they're starting to become adults. Some of my students will become voting members of society. They're going to be thriving, and they're getting ready to kind of move on to their lives. And within a year or 2, they're going to have the opportunity to move right into the workforce and actually be adults. And so I expect that kind of responsibility, that kind of behavior out of my students as well. And then lastly, my students should come into my classroom ready to learn, ready to engage, ready to participate, and ready to grow. And lastly, for my classroom management, go my consequences. I don't really want to use these. I don't really expect to use too many of these, but they go as such: verbal warning, student-teacher chat, and then a write-up. If my students misbehave or they have their phone out, I'm going to first start with just a verbal warning. Hey, can you put that away? Remember our classroom rules and expectations. And then if they continue that offense, it might come down to where we have a one-on-one chat. That student sticks around after class and we talk about what's going on, why they're continuing to misbehave. And if that doesn't work, then I will unfortunately have to write them up. Hopefully it doesn't come to that, but it's there if needed. And how does this connect to Greenwood? Talking to my cooperating teacher, Mrs. Pontius, she has very similar classroom expectations and rules, and there's a lot of overlap within here. And so I think these classroom procedures are going to flow well when I student teach next semester. As an ag teacher, if I had my way and could design my model program, this is something that it would look like. So right here, I have 5 different pathways that students can take: natural resources management, global leadership, plant science, agricultural mechanics, and animal science. Me being the nature nerd that I am, I would focus very much over here on this natural resource global leadership aspect of it, teaching a lot of wildlife, aquatics, natural resources, forestry classes. But I also really love the other disciplines within agriculture and would be excited to teach some of those as well. Now, as part of our curriculum here as seniors at Penn State, with Dr. Curry's AE 350 mechanic class, we were assigned a lab integration plan and project. And so this year is an example of a $15 project that my students would be able to build and assemble within the classroom. This here is a platform bird feeder, and it's super simple. This would be done in the agricultural mechanics shop, but what I really like about this project is how it can combine so many different aspects in a good agricultural education program. Honestly, what I would probably do with this project is have my natural resources students collaborate with the agricultural mechanics students to design and build this project. And then what I would then do is take this project, give it to my natural resources class, and they could implement it somewhere. So they could participate in citizen science research with Project Feeder Watch. They could work with local community organizations to hang these bird feeders and get them involved in citizen science projects as a community-based unit of instruction. There's just so much that you could do with this project and its simplicity. Not only that, but who doesn't like birds? Shout out to Dr. Cooper. Now in my program, I believe in the three-circle model as an agricultural educator. And so that's classroom instruction, FFA, and SAE, and how they all interact and align to each other. And so as a teacher, I believe in incorporating SAE and FFA as much as I incorporate classroom instruction. And as part of that, all of my first year students are going to have SAE projects to get them involved in record keeping and understanding what an SAE is. I'm also going to have for all of my students SAE Fridays where I teach certain skills such as financial literacy and record keeping. I'm going to talk a little bit later on about financial literacy and how that plays a role in my classroom because that's another big passion of mine. And I'll talk a little bit later about how that came to be. And as far as FFA integration, all of my students in every single class, if possible, are going to participate in at least one FFA event throughout the year, whether that be a chapter meeting or a competition. An example of this could look like my wildlife class participating in the local or state wildlife CBE competition. Okay, there was technology issues before. We're going to try this. Do I have to wait for you to go for free? Cool that down at the ag department we know how to roll. Yeah. So really we want to be relevant to our students' experiences and interests. As far as community involvement goes within my Model Ag program, one of the biggest things I want to point out is those community-based units of instruction. And we learned about that in our AE 413 class with Dr. Ewing. And really what that basically means is students are able to learn something in the classroom and apply it to the community and really get the community involved in the curriculum. And so going back to that $15 bird feeder project, that's just one example of a community-based unit of instruction that I would like to incorporate in my ag program. I also believe it's really important for students to serve their local communities. And so we're going to be participating in quite a few service learning projects and opportunities inside and outside of the classroom. And lastly, as a teacher, for me, it's really important to help develop a good alumni and supporters organization for our local FFA chapter and ag program. It's those supporters that really allow agricultural education to occur in the classroom. Second question, what experiences have I engaged in throughout my college career and beyond to help me become a better educator? Starting with my Penn State courses. One of the biggest experiences that I had was as a sophomore here at Penn State. Lacey Walker and I, a fellow cohort member, participated in the Penn State Seed Semester, and I have one of my instructors and a couple more online for that. Basically what that is, it's an intense 18-credit semester where we spend the entire semester out at Penn State, out at Shavers Creek, which is Penn State's nature center. And we take classes such as cultural and natural history interpretation, outdoor education methods and materials, all sorts of classes. And this is a picture of our group. We took a 10-day trip up to New England and had a lot of immersive experiences with outdoor recreation and education. And that really developed my passion as an outdoor educator. And so that was really inspiring for me. Another class that I took is Animal Science 201, which many people within agricultural education here at Penn State take this class. And it's really this broad class covering all sorts of aspects of animal science. It's really in depth, and for all of my veterinary science units that I'll be teaching next semester, I pulled from that curriculum. So it was really pivotal in my understanding for animal science. Another class that I took is Sustainability Leadership 200 with Lucy McLean. That class honestly changed my perspective on sustainability and how we view educating and advocating for sustainability within the public. And then lastly, my agricultural mechanics classes with Dr. Ewing and AE 412, my methods class with Dr. Foster, have helped me to develop my content knowledge on agricultural mechanics, but also my confidence and ability to get up in front of the classroom and teach. As far as professional development goes, within the last year especially, I've been able to participate in the Pennsylvania Association of Agricultural Educators Conference, as well as the National NAA Conference, where we experienced all sorts of professional development workshops, and I have pages and pages and pages of notes from each of those experiences that I hope to apply to my classroom in the future. And then lastly, got to represent the hashtag Super Bowl LDE for helping out at the National FFA competition with Dr. Foster 2 years, for the last 2 years, -1 because of COVID, gap year, yeah. As far as my accreditations go, I am an accredited parliamentarian to the Society of Agricultural Educator Parliamentarians. Yes, that's how you say it. I'm also level 1 certified with Soren Ericsson's Game of Logging, which was a really cool experience as I had back in high school. I am National Safe Tractor and Machine Operator certified, as well as Flipgrid level 1 certified educator. And over the last couple of years, I've had a lot of work and internship experiences. Some highlights here include this past summer, I was a research intern out at Ag Progress Days, which is Penn State's research farm. I learned a whole bunch there. Was able to hop on equipment like planters and cultivators, and just tractors in general. When I didn't come from a farm background, and all of a sudden I'm in this huge giant tractor worth $250,000, and I'm like, Jesse, are you sure you trust me with this thing? And he said, let her rip, Tater Chip. I was also a student ambassador at the Penn State Financial Literacy Center the last 3 years, which is really where my love and passion for financial literacy has stemmed from. And so in that time, I've presented hundreds of presentations and worked with hundreds of students across Penn State's Commonwealth on financial literacy, helping them develop skills and understanding things like credit cards, budgeting, saving and investing, and more. I also spent the last 3.5 years working at the Penn State Dairy Barns, and I've learned so much in terms of animal handling and management, as well as anatomy and physiology out there. And I can't wait to take some of those experiences into the classroom. An example of that, we had a cow prolapse her uterus. It was really graphic and gory, so I'm not sharing pictures. But we had a cow prolapse her uterus a couple weeks ago, and I'm like, they're taking pictures of the vet working, and blood's everywhere. And I'm like, man, I can't wait to show this to my vet kids. So really excited for that. 2 years ago, I also was an intern at National Beef, which is one of the largest meat processors in the country. And that was back home, and I was a quality assurance intern there. So I learned from start to finish, from the time that meat hits our plant to the time it exits. I walked through the entire process throughout the whole summer, learned a lot about meat cuts and as well as food safety and sanitation. How do I plan to meet diverse needs within the classroom? And a couple of experiences that go along with that. First and foremost, all of you know that I am a father to this sweet gem. Her name's Haven. She's 4.5 years old now. And one way that I plan to meet diverse needs in the classroom is being able to relate to students who are going through things in high school. So her mom and I got pregnant with her when I was in high school. I was a senior in high school. And that was honestly a really tough time for me throughout school. But I had a lot of teachers and friends who reached out to me and helped me through that. And taking that experience now, whenever my students are going through things, whether that be at home or even at school with their academics, I now have this experience that I can pull from to be able to empathize and show compassion towards them with. Another way is through state FFA office. So spending that year with thousands of students across Pennsylvania and beyond has really opened my eyes to the backgrounds of some of our students that are coming into our program. Most of them don't come from ag backgrounds. And so how do we incorporate them into this world, into this realm the best we can? And lastly, I have had some awesome experiences to travel domestically and abroad. This is a picture of me back in high school when a group of us took a trip to Peru. And just being immersed in that culture really opened my eyes to some of the global aspects of what we talk about when we talk about agriculture. And that third and final question, how am I prepared to maximize my student teaching internship in the spring? A little bit about my cooperating center. I'll be teaching at Greenwood High School with Mrs. Krista Pontius. It is a 2-teacher program, so it's KP as well as Mr. Mike Clark there. It's a pretty rural district, located in central Pennsylvania, about an hour southeast of here, and they have about 160 members total. Now that's high school. They also do have a middle school program. They have about 80 8th grade participants in there. Some of their strengths include FFA and community involvement. Their FFA program, in my opinion, is top notch, but I'm not biased at all or anything. But they participate in just about every state event, every local event, and quite a few national events as well, whether that be Big E or national convention. One area of improvement that I hope to work with KP on next spring is developing SAE curriculum even more. And so going back to that NAE conference that we went to as for professional development a couple weeks ago, I was able to sit in on a couple SAE workshops and really develop a kind of a love for something that I once hated as a student. As a teacher, I'm really excited to implement that in my classroom someday. This here shows a master calendar of what I will be teaching in the spring. And so I'll be teaching 6 total classes between KP and Mr. Clark. That's plant science, engines, fish and wildlife, food science, FFA leadership, and veterinary science. And something that I'm really, really excited about is teaching stream biology and aquaculture within my fish and wildlife class, just because I'm going to be able to flex those muscles a little bit. But I'm also really excited to do the chainsaw safety and operations unit within my engines class as well, because I'm not as familiar with that. I'm really excited to try something new next semester. As far as evaluating my strengths and weaknesses go, in terms of my strengths, I believe that I have a lot of content knowledge, especially when it comes into that natural resource area. Throughout the semester, I was able to talk through some of my cohort mates, some of their lessons, and share some of my units and lessons that I'll be teaching next semester in that. I also believe that I'm pretty good at prioritizing my time. So something that I pulled from a good friend of mine, Justin Kurtz, is working kind of a 9 to 5 throughout college. And so from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., I would grind out work during the day, focus on school, and then after that 5 p.m., I'd always joke with my mom, I would clock out, and I would go do things that I would want to do. I'd spend time with friends. I would spend time cultivating relationships with other people. I also believe that I have a growth mindset, trying to constantly learn from every single opportunity that I face. As far as areas of improvement go, in no way am I perfect, and this list is not exhaustive. But two big things that I really want to work on next semester are my skills in delegation, and reaching out to people, asking for help, and trying not to do everything myself, but also in not comparing myself to other people. Something that I've talked to a couple of my cohort mates with this semester is the whole imposter syndrome and facing that. And oftentimes I catch myself comparing myself to Thomas or Michaela or Taylor or Dylan. And realistically, at the end of the day, I don't need to be them in my classroom. I need to be me in my classroom. And so really trying to focus on that next semester is going to be pivotal for me. I have three main goals as a teacher next semester during student teaching. One of those is staying connected to my family, friends, and community. I've really developed this community here at Penn State. I hate to leave it next semester. And so in my mind, I'm still trying to grasp the concept of leaving, but how do I stay connected with them throughout student teaching, whether that be through Zoom calls or phone calls, texting or GroupMe, or even just writing letters back and forth, getting together on the weekends. That's going to be a priority for me as a teacher. I also want to find a blend. And so something that I got from a teacher named Rachel Savola in Wisconsin, I mentioned a work-life balance with her, and she said, whoa, 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 whoa. A balance implies equal. She said, Nate, teaching is not always equal. And I was like, okay, I'm going to roll with that. And so it's finding a blend. So how do I maintain my professional life and my personal life to the best of my ability? If I spend a couple extra hours at school one day, the next day I gotta leave school as soon as I can and go spend an extra couple hours at it. How do I blend that? And then lastly, I want to expand my horizons. I want to expand my content knowledge in areas of agricultural mechanics and vet science, but I also want to expand my learning in classroom management. I feel like I've learned so much this semester already, but I have a whole lot more to learn next semester and beyond. So with that being said, once again, I'd like to thank you for coming to my final presentation. You all have had such an impact on me. I'm really excited to share the rest of my journey of life with all of you from beyond this. Thank you.
Thank you, Nate. As a reminder, we're going to queue up presentation questions from the audience and from online. Nate, I'll ask if you would for the online audience to repeat the questions out loud before you respond. And I'll start us off. I heard Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset several times. I would love if you maybe peered into some of the theories on motivation that you learned during your 4 years here at Penn State. And maybe don't go to the heady sort of boring rendition of what the theory states, but give me some pragmatic things from what you've learned in your time here at Penn State and how you're going to motivate students in the classroom.
Yeah, sure. So my kind of my passion for growth mindset started from Mrs. Fry, my ag teacher. She actually gave me that book by Carol Dweck. That's when I first heard about growth mindset. One way that I plan to, I'm sorry, I didn't repeat the question. How am I going to incorporate the growth mindset into my classroom in the future? So one of the ways that I plan to do that specifically is to each and every day try to encourage at least one of my students in a small way. And so something that I learned from Mrs. Pontius that she likes to do, if students are working within small groups or even individually, she likes to kind of float around the room and peer over students' shoulders. If she sees work, especially from a student that might be struggling in a class or might not be a type A student, she likes to kind of touch their shoulder, lean down, and just say, "Hey, nice work on that. I really appreciate what you said here or what you're working on here." And that right there, showing students how much you care, that you see, that you notice them, that you see them in your classroom, is going to do so much for motivating them to do more work in the future and strive for that growth mindset.
Thank you.
Sir.
Questions from the group?
So you've had a lot of work experience, and both here on campus and internships in the summertime. For an incoming freshman who's looking to gain more of that experience with the applied content, right? Like actually going to work at some of these places they'll pull into their classroom later. What advice would you give them to start that process as a freshman?
So what advice would I give to incoming freshmen to help them start the process of finding realistic work experience that they can later apply to their classroom? One thing that I would recommend is hopping on Penn State's Workday system and typing in keywords that you find interesting. And so Penn State's HR services, all of their jobs are listed on one website, every single job in the entire campus. And you can find jobs literally by just typing in keywords. And so one way I actually found that internship that I did at Ag Progress Days, I typed in agriculture and hit search, and then that came up on like number 2 on the list as a possible job that I could have. And so really you can find jobs across the campus in pretty much any discipline or area that you find interesting. And so I would honestly just start on Workday and start typing in those keywords for you to find those jobs. Thanks, Preston. That's a great question.
We have a question from Megan Moyer in chat. How do you plan to keep your class engaging while tying in your nuggets of knowledge? Any activities you are most excited to complete with your students at Greenwood?
I have an idea. I have an answer. Can you repeat the question though, so I can also repeat the question? That's okay.
How do you plan to keep your class engaged while tying in your nuggets of knowledge? Any activities you're most excited to complete with your students at Greenwood?
So sort of a two-part question. How do I plan to keep my students engaged? And what activity or project am I excited to incorporate next semester? One, going back to my teaching philosophy is keeping my content and delivery variable. And so not having my students sit down and work on worksheets all day or going off of PowerPoint all day, but doing interactive labs, inquiry-based labs, getting them outside into an outdoor classroom space is really pivotal for me as an educator. And I plan on doing that a lot, getting my students outside. One activity that I'm really excited for my students to work on is within our forestry unit when we do our tree ID. And this comes from Penn State Seed Semester with Doug Wenzel, who led us through interpretive materials for learning trees. And so walking my students through tree ID through natural history interpretation, whether that be through songwriting or like this hands-on project, giving my students the opportunity to interpret a tree and how they want to teach the class through that project. Thank you. Thanks, Megan, for tuning in.
We also have another question in the chat from Mr. Bramer. Great presentation, Nate. How will you balance family life and your professional life?
That's a great question, Mr. B, because I don't have the answer to it yet. Still figuring that out. How do I plan to balance my professional and my home life? Once again, going back to kind of that blended model, I'm not going to strive for a balance, very strict, rigid. I'm going to work 9 to 5 at the school and then go home, from 5 to 9 at home. And I'm not going to do that because for me, I don't think that's sustainable. And for those of you who are familiar with agricultural education, that's not really sustainable or realistic as an ag teacher. One way though that I plan to incorporate that is lending. And so Haven's really young, but she's already participated in some events that we've held at Greenwood this past fall. And she's already met Mrs. Pontius and Mr. Clark and already has fallen in love with those two. And I plan to incorporate her into my classroom in my whole life. Because really both make me. Both are a part of my life. And I want to be authentic and honest and true throughout my entire life, whether it's at home or at school. And so really just trying to find a blend and how to incorporate that. But also prioritizing time, I think, is really important. So one like concrete thing that I'm going to try to do is not take on any grading assignments next semester. So I plan to get everything graded at school. That way I can focus on what I need to do at home.
Cycle back to our faculty and staff panel or our audience's questions.
So you mentioned that you were really excited to learn some new things at NAE about SAE. A lot of acronyms there for those of you guys that aren't ag ed people. But you learned a lot about supervised agricultural experiences. And what are some things that you're really excited to start integrating, either at Greenwood or in the future?
So the question was, what am I excited to incorporate regarding SAEs based on the professional development that I got a couple weeks ago into my classroom? What was cool about the NAA conference and that AET, SAE, sorry, a lot of acronyms, that professional development was we got, his name's Roger, I forget his last name.
Henniger.
Um,
Henniger.
Roger Hannegriff, who is the owner of AET, which is our SAE record keeping system. And he was providing this professional development. So he knew what he was talking about. One thing that I'm really excited to take from that workshop is incorporating agroscience record books into the classroom. And so within KP's class, all of her students have agroscience research projects. But taking what I know now about that record keeping system, how do we incorporate that to better our students' record keeping on those projects and help them, grow as future proficiency learners in the future?
Nathan, why should an administrator hire you?
That's a good question. Why should an administrator hire me? If I were asked that in an interview, I'd probably answer it. I'm not any more special than probably any person who interviewed for this role. I'm not any more special than the educators who are graduating alongside of me this coming spring. And so really, they should hire me because I plan to be authentic as a teacher, honest and true within my classroom. And really, my number one goal within the class is to develop every single student that walks in and out of my classroom. And each and every day, I'm going to put forth my best effort to do that, to make sure that every single student that comes into my class feels as if they're valued, feels as if they're cared for, because at the end of the day, they are. Now, as far as content knowledge goes, there's a lot of people who are smarter than I am. There's a lot of people who can probably teach method-wise a lot better than I can. But as far as why administrators should hire me, I have the heart of an ed teacher, and I plan to always have that heart.
Back to our online audience.
We have a lot of questions over here. So we'll start with Facebook. Macy Fisher. Hey, I know you're very passionate about IGED and FFA. We have students who we can see how much this is learned, but we can't get them motivated or spark their passion for FFA and involvement. What would you do to motivate this student or help them see their potential for success in FFA?
So what can I do as an educator to help motivate students who might not show an interest in FFA within the classroom? I think one of those things could be varying my assessments. And so rather than giving strict tests or certain projects to students, varying that and giving students an opportunity to showcase their strengths and weaknesses, mostly their strengths, showcase their strengths. So what that could look like is giving sort of a pick one option on a project of you have to teach the class about this mink in our wildlife class. Now, there's several ways that you can do it. If you really like the presentation aspect of it, you can give a presentation. If you really like songwriting, you could write a song about the mink. If you really like hands-on art and modeling, you could create a model of the mink in that way. And by showcasing the students' strengths in that way, you can help them see that their strengths, their passions, whether it be art or history, can be incorporated into the agricultural classroom. And hopefully from there, that helps them stem an interest further into FFA and SAE.
We have another question. 13% if you have a student that's interested in becoming an agriculture educator, what resources and tips would you give them based off your experience in becoming?
So if I'm talking to someone who is interested in becoming an agricultural educator, what advice would I give to them to get started? First and foremost, I think just reaching out to local resources is pivotal in that. So I know that the big three ag ed professors back here, Dr. Curry, Dr. Ewing, and Dr. Foster, are always willing to talk to prospective students coming into the major. And it can seem really, really daunting to send that email or send that letter or make that phone call. But I know that our faculty and staff, Beth and John, and also the students within the program as well, are extremely willing to share what it is we do and what we're about with those students. And so make that phone call, send that email, type that letter, and mail it. That'd be my first piece of advice.
How about getting a question from the audience?
So you talked a lot about, I don't know if you mentioned the word community, but I felt the word community when you talked about staying in touch with friends and your family. How will you, so I know that that's a piece of it. How will you help to create community in your classroom that can enhance the learning experience?
Yeah, so the question was, because I value community so much, how do I plan to create a community within my classroom to enhance learning there? And I think one of the ways that I'm going to do that is actually taking from your class, Lori, from Penn State seed semester, which was team building facilitation. We learned a lot about developing community in and outside of the classroom through pedagogy and hands-on activities there. And so taking a lot of the content from that class and applying it to all of my curriculum, I think will help develop a community and help develop friendships and relationships within my classroom that will extend beyond it. It's a great question. Thank you.
I'm going. All right, Nathan. So you shared some certifications that you've earned that will make you a better educator. And I believe the one that you, or one of them that you highlighted was around Flipgrid.
Yes, sir.
And I guess my question really comes back to, now that you've earned that certification, how can you see yourself integrating that technology into your instruction, specific to Flipgrid?
Yeah, so Flipgrid is basically an online platform where you can share groups and discussions through video format. And so one way that I plan on doing or incorporating Flipgrid into my classroom, which was the question, how do I plan to incorporate Flipgrid into my classroom, is through just using it. And so it's a very simple technology, but there's also a lot that you can do with it. And I plan to help my students collaborate on different projects through that video format. And so one way that we might be able to even incorporate that is through teaching each other through these short video segments and helping each other learn through commenting, watching these videos, commenting and posting their thoughts and opinions on that, and hosting discussions through that platform.
Question from the online audience?
We do have one online. It's Sarah Mesker. It says, hi Nate, wonderful presentation. What plans do you have to engage parents, guardians, and students work in the classroom?
So the question was, how do I plan to incorporate parents, guardians, and community into what's going on in my classroom? That's an excellent question. One, I'm excited to answer. One of the ways that I plan to do that is making my own, I don't know what the platform is going to be called yet, but it's going to be an Instagram or Facebook page for what I do as a teacher. So whether it's like Mr. Moyer's Moments or something like that, and sharing with our community what we're doing within the classroom. A couple of my friends, one of them, Mr. Brandon Whitmer, who teaches at Otto Eldridge High School, does that with his program. And parents and guardians and community members are able to follow that Instagram account and see what the students are doing in the classroom. And they're able to comment and share that post. And really, it has helped build more of a community. And it's helped the community get involved into the classroom. If they see that, oh, they're making goat milk soap in the classroom and they're selling it. Oh, they're commenting, how do I buy some? And they're sharing it out with their friends and family, getting the community involved in the classroom that way. So for me, social media is going to be a big proponent of that.
More online. It says, during the launch of the PSU Dairy, what are some ways that you plan on integrating industry professionals and producers into your classroom?
Another great question. Shout out to the Dairy Barn kids, who my 7 roommates who are rooting me on from back to the barns. How do I plan to incorporate industry professionals into the classroom? Really two ways. One, bring them into the classroom, and two, take my students outside of the classroom to them. And so for one of my lessons for my wildlife unit, I already have in mind a family friend who works for DCNR. He's a forester. And I already plan on asking him to come into the classroom and talk about some of the things that we're learning about that day. And so on the side, he also traps and is a fur, he like tans his own hides and his own pelts. And I plan on bringing him in for my taxidermy unit when we start talking about that, walking him through the process. And also, how does this relate to what he does as an industry professional, as a forester, working for DCNR. Another way I plan to do that is taking my students outside of the classroom for field trips and whatnot. Back home, there is a local hydroponics greenhouse. It's huge that just opened up a couple years ago. And we actually have a teacher at Greenwood who works there part-time. So one day for my hydroponics unit within my plant science class, I would love to ship my students up to Selinsgrove for a day, get a tour of the greenhouse, and talk about what kind of opportunities there are within the plant science industry, specifically talking to those industry professionals in the greenhouse.
Questions from our group here face to face? Please help me in thanking Nate one more time for a great presentation. Concludes the public portion of the presentation. We'll ask if you were retired at 2:14. There are snacks and refreshments there. Our next presentation will begin promptly at 12:30 with, I believe, Ms. Lacey Wall.